Welcome to Making Whole, conversations on faith, mercy, and justice. I'm Benjamin, and on this episode, I'm joined by my friend Ian North. Ian is the embodiment of warmth and welcome. With his life and story, he is declaring to our immigrant neighbors they are seen, heard, and matter. He is making whole through the complexity and simplicity of presence. I'm excited for you to engage in this beautiful conversation with us. This is Making Whole. One of my first encounters with you, I was like just starting to get into running. And so I was really into like all the technology, all the shoes, all the things. And I was noticing that out in the world. And so I noticed your watch. And I think I asked you like if you were a runner, which is probably the worst question I've ever asked you. Because then I found out that you're an ultra runner. And I was like training for a 10 miler or something at the time. But eventually we did go on a run, and it was one of the most like life-giving adventures I've been on. And we were going through this crazy little course you had mapped out where we were running along alleys and railroad tracks at one point. At one point we were in a forest jumping over logs. But all the while you were telling me your story, and I was trying to tell you a little bit of my story. And I felt such a deep connection to you, to your story, just to the journey that you'd been on. And though our stories are different because they're individual, there were so many things that were similar. And so I just love getting to know you in the context of running and in the context of life. And so I was excited about having this conversation with you so that other people could know you in this way. So maybe just give us some context and location. Who are you? What are you doing in the world today that's making whole?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I feel like if you want to get to know someone, you do it running because you're distraction free. There's no pressure to say anything because you're in an activity and you can speak as it comes to you. And yeah, I remember that specific run and route really well. Um, I am Ian North. I grew up overseas in the Philippines, and my parents were missionaries with an evangelical organization. I think when I arrived back in America, um, immediately I felt like misunderstood
Mm,
and not fully welcomed as I was in this culture. And I had also had that experience going over to the Philippines from America when I was 3 years old and kind of living there as a foreigner. Um, so in my young adulthood, I spent a lot of time wondering if I belonged wherever I was. And also a lot of time wrestling with my faith, and that kinda took me here to Atlanta, where we started a ministry called Presencia. It is a nonprofit, and we, uh, try and create a community of welcome for children of immigrants. Been doing that work for about 16 years, with other side jobs along the way. Um, but yeah, we're trying to build healthy community between people who live here and are from here, and people are here who are here from other places.
yeah, so good. And can you talk a little bit about the genesis of Presencia? Because I know that's like deeply tied to your own personal story and kind of where you picked to live when you came to Atlanta. Can you talk through that?
Yeah, I feel like maybe a lot of people who are in justice work or are trying to make the world whole, as you stated really well, um, get a vision or an idea of God and who God is and how God works, and then try and deliver that to a community.
Mm,
Certainly, the model of ministry I grew up seeing. My story was really different. My faith uh, that I was raised with was failing to answer some important questions and failing to heal some deep wounds in my person.
mm,
Uh, I was attending Moody Bible Institute and just not, um, connecting or feeling like we were talking about real things
Mm,
in my classes there. Um, and so I spent some time, um, where I wouldn't have been sure if God existed or if I would have called myself a Christian. Um, and then there was a certain point where I found that I couldn't get away from it. A sense
mm,
that there was a God who was present, who was active in my life, though in ways I couldn't figure out. Um, and so my wife and I spent some time talking, and we heard the passage where I think it's Matthew 35, where Jesus gathers the nations,
mm,
before him, and the people in the crowd, I think they're surprised they had contact with Jesus along the way, and they're like, "How and where?" And he was like, "Oh, I was hungry, and he gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and he gave me something to drink." And so, on that sort of text alone, uh, we decided to move into a community with uh, felt needs, and just decided to start meeting those needs. I felt like it would be really sweet to have an experience of God or even a understanding of God that had to do with love
mm.
expressed in meaningful ways to people. So I went into the immigrant community of Atlanta uh, in search of God, uh, more than I was delivering God anywhere, and that was how the work started.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, would resonate with that line of thinking. What would you say, um, were the experiences that maybe had shaped your imagination for what it would mean to like live amongst this community? Like, what gave you the confidence that like, oh, we can go as, two white, young, Bible college educated people, and live in an immigrant community?
Yeah, well, it's first of all, that lifestyle is more familiar to me than, say, living as a white person in a white community.
Mm, mm-hmm,
Um, I grew up in the Philippines. At some points, I would have been the only American in town. Um, and then within the Philippines, there are several different languages. So whenever my parents would move to start a new church plant somewhere, um, I was at zero again as
mm,
far as the language. So feeling a little bit like we're figuring it out as we go, or that there's an assumption, a basic assumption of difference between ourselves and our neighbors in some ways. Is what I'm used to. So I wasn't moving into new space so much as returning into a familiar space and hoping to do a little better with
mm,
that. Also, one of the things I treasure differences between people,
mm.
differences in perspective, in experience, in language. I think that by interacting across those lines, we just discover really rich and true things. So those ideas were kind of with me. First of all, I was moving, sort of coming home to an experience, but hoping to make it better than what I had grown up in. Um, and then the second part was I was actually moving towards something that was promising, joyful, deep, rich, so that hope kept me going and has kept us going through some really challenging seasons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think one of the curiosities I have is like how a person who doesn't is grows up in a context in which they feel like they don't belong, like how does that person come to then value difference? Uh, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. Um, I think that I think that whether or not we like something,
Mm,
if it's familiar, it can reassure us in some way. And that can work for us or against us in
mm,
our lives. Um, but if I accept that I sort of have like a base difference in experience with the people in my community, if I accept that and understand that it's kind of a base level reality that I may be more aware of or more alert to, um, then moving into that and embracing that is just like accepting who I am.
Mm.
And being with people who are noticeably different or where you can spot the differences really easily is somehow uh, affirms how I feel anyway. Um, so I feel like reaching across those gaps is home for me.
Wow.
Um, I've I've thought about all the different places I've been in my life, and sometimes I honestly feel like an airport is
Mm.
maybe the most consistent environment throughout my life, is just being in transit or in process or a stranger in a place. Um, that's just an experience that feels real to me and where I'm used to being. So I wouldn't say it was a radical departure for me.
Yeah, and I feel it's. Uh, I just want to name like I feel emotional, even hearing you say that, like feeling in transit, and then because I know, like where this conversation's going in some ways, but also, um, I don't think I've ever heard you. Well, I may have heard you say it once or twice, like the mission of Presencia, but the name of presence. So
Yeah.
again, there's this yeah, I feel this tension of like, hey, I feel like I'm always in transit, and yet I'm saying I think the solution is presence.
Yeah.
So can you talk about moments in your journey of starting Presencia where you were sort of affirmed in that reality that like, oh yeah, this works. Like just being with people is sort of what begins to make us more whole.
Yeah, I had a lot of in my work, I've worked with a lot of the same people for 16 years.
Mm,
And when we started the work, they were small children, you know? And so as they grow up, they see me as a safe adult and a safe person of a kind they aren't used to thinking of as safe. So, for example, I'll get a lot of questions like, "Hey, Ian, why do white people blank?" You know, a lot of them, a lot of different ways to fill out that sentence. And I'm also a visitor to white culture, so I sort of can answer it like an anthropologist. Um, but I've found that both in like the differences of our experience, but then in being present together over time, this sense of safety develops. A, a neuroscientist I like talks about health is where you have differentiation and integration in balance. And
mm,
so I feel like the differentiation side of health is saying, hey, our experiences are really different. There are some things that I need you to teach me because I don't know them and I can't know them in a way that's native to me.
mm,
But if we're present together into an integrated whole and we see we have an integrated whole across those differences, then I can gain from your experience. Like I've learned a lot about how my people are perceived. um and I've also had chances to create relationships that wouldn't have existed otherwise. So yeah, the differentiation part is what I've been talking about. The feeling that I'm in transit or in process or maybe don't belong. I'm not native to an environment.
mm.
Um, and then there's the integration that happens through presence with someone over time. And I feel like those two really in a healthy relationship or a healthy community or a healthy ministry or nonprofit, those two have to work together if we're going to create and do meaningful things. So I see them maybe as um, different parts of the same process.
Yeah, that's really beautiful and I think really helpful. You know, we say that this podcast is about having curious and consequential conversations. And I think that's a
Hmm.
really, I just want to like mark that for people as like that is a really consequential thought is like hey, if you can begin to notice and template in your environment, in your world, whatever that is, like where there is difference and integration, like you can be on to something really important. And so thank you for walking that out, because I don't know that I've ever heard it explained that way. But I think you're giving like real practical, true language to maybe some of the things that Paul's talking about in the scriptures about being
Yeah.
parts of a body, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and I was like, well, that's a strange idea. And you've sort
Yeah.
of said this is how that works.
Yeah, I would say that the faith that was familiar to me growing up maybe didn't take the differentiation into account.
Hmm.
So, everyone was expected to be a mouth in the body of Christ, which is or, um, you know, uh, but the differentiation part would say, "No, like, you and I have profoundly different roles in this, but we're united by purpose or by the spirit or, so uh I think the differentiation part, being honest about that and having integrity to it, it matters a lot to the thing if we're gonna create a healing whole.
Mm, yeah, that's really good. On the other side of a question of like, yeah, this is good, this is working. Mark some of those moments for us along the way where you've been like, maybe this doesn't work, or maybe we can't make a difference. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure those parts of the story exist also.
Yeah, maybe more. Maybe more than the others. Um, no, I'll say there have been a couple seasons like this. I think I felt, led to explore, like neuroscience and the science of relationships and also teach some conflict resolution stuff. And so I spent our staff, they all grew up in our programs. We're at that point now where the second graders we started with are old enough to lead the work. And so we mainly, in my work now, I mainly support them and make sure there's community and all the kinds of support they need to work well. Um, but I had spent a lot of time training my staff on this stuff, and I was also training the high schoolers, our high school students on it. Um, and then there was a situation of relational conflict in our staff, and nobody did any of the things I had been talking about for 6 months. I mean, there was
As it
just
goes.
yeah, there was just, like, a gathering of people, like, before you talk to the person with whom you had conflict, there was, like, a gathering of, like, uh, you know anyway, it was all handled in a way that was really difficult for me to experience, and at that point, um, eh, I think there were several months that followed that season where I was just like, "What am I doing? What am I doing?" And I had to come back to the idea that, like, it's my joy to be with these people and to work
Mm,
with them and to be in the process with them. And whether or not, the stuff I'm doing, takes root as quickly as I hope it would or, or is immediately applied, uh, to our work, well, that side of it is like, um frosting, but it's not the cake.
mm, mhm.
The real joy and the real meaningful part is that I get to engage in this work with care and get to do it well, and I get to love these people through the ups and downs of that relationship. And the results of, like, hoping that th things would be handled in a, like, peaceable, constructive, way. Sometimes people are young and they just have to learn it a few times.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And you built the bridge for me. You said a couple of things that I keyed in on, which were come back to, and get to. So
Mhm.
what are the rhythms and practices that you're coming back to? And what is it that shapes that perspective in you that like this is a privilege, you get to do this? Because I think that would be helpful for people to know, like, how does somebody do this for 16 years?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, almost anything I feel in terms of whether it's an up or down in the work, um, seems really big and permanent. And
Mm,
the thing I've been learning lately is to give it time to settle.
mm,
And that takes years, often, especially when you're working with youth or young people. It can take years for a situation to change or years for me to accept a situation. So I think the rhythms of taking time to write about things. So I send out a weekly email from our ministry, and often they're about like things going on or fundraising opportunities or things like that. But a lot of them are just given to reflecting on things I notice. So when it's like, what do we write about this week? Well, it's like, well, what did you notice? How did that
mm,
affect you? And so I use that space to process. Maybe it's because it's going out, because there's people's privacy involved, and it's going out to a broad community. Um, uh, I don't maybe get as gritty in those communications as happens in my body when I'm processing stuff. But so I give that time to process. We talked about running. I have a lot of friends who are way outside of my work, uh, who I spent a lot of time just running and letting things settle, letting things make a home or pass through my system.
mhm,
But I think in my work, it's really important to understand that like it's a process. There's no product. There's no end result. You're caring, you're loving. And as long as you're alive, that's how it is.
mm, mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
if things are fixed, they're dead. So,
mm, yeah, that's a really powerful statement. I want you to say more about that. If things are fixed, they're dead.
um, I think it's also there's a lot I was realizing when I was reflecting on this conversation, and that you sent over some prompts for my thinking, and um I just did not see love as a dynamic thing that uh keeps going, right? It's always in process if it's real love. And
Mm,
I think when you're raised on what I would think of as like a sort of wooden theology where things are fixed, and it's our job to determine them and then to stick with that for the rest of time, um and then to bring other people to those fixed things. And then I think I've grown into a realization that, like, for whether we like it or not, life is gonna be moving us through chapters, and things will be changing, and for someone who's looking for something fixed or solid, that can be a real uncomfortable
mhm,
reality. Um, but there's a science fiction writer I like, Octavia Butler, and in one of her novels, The Parable of the Sower, she says, God is change.
mm,
That's the ultimate thing, is change. Um, I wouldn't state it that way, but it's the same as like it's the same as the philosopher Heraclitus, who's like, you don't step into the same river twice. It's
mhm.
always it's always changing. I feel like when we can accept that, maybe we can have the ability to enjoy the ride a little more. Uh, that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, that's really good. Just a quick break to remind you that this podcast is one of the spaces being created for healing and hope on the way to a more just and beautiful world by Sozo Justice Collective. To learn more about or provide support for this work, visit us at www.sozojustice.com. For more information on Presencia and Ian's work, head over to www.presenciaatl.com. That's PRESENCIAATL.com. So we're gonna zoom out a little bit at this point, because I think there's, you know, the work you're doing is so important, but it's important it's made maybe how we understand its importance is maybe grounded in like the real actual thing, right? When you talk about
Yeah,
living in an immigrant community,
yeah,
actually some of the idea for starting this podcast came up during all the stuff we were seeing on social media coming out of Minnesota around ICE, around, Liam Ramos, these kinds of things were happening. And I'm just sort of like sitting there taking it all in, like what what could I do about that? And I'm sure a lot of people ask that question. And so oftentimes we just kind of maybe stop at like reposting something, and then we're like, we
yeah,
did it. We told somebody else that bad things were happening. And so I want to just
yeah,
like have a little bit of a conversation of like, what's it mean to have a wider view of immigration? What's it mean to have a Jesus view of immigration? And how could we think about this? Because I think that's part of the work of making whole. It's like critically thinking well about, there are people in the world that are like long before it came across our news feed, you were thinking about this. And so, we want to
yeah,
take your perspective with that kind of into account. Um, so yeah, I think that's a little bit of what I'm thinking about. Like what was that like for you? Because I know even before that, this was already kind of flaring up before it became like the national fodder. Like, yeah. So what
yeah.
was it like for you?
Yeah, I think the day after we found out the election results, uh, there was this just picture of Dulce, this little girl I work with, that
Mm,
I couldn't stop looking at
mm,
because I was hearing the narratives coming from places of power about who immigrants are and, like, even calling it a problem. I just have this picture of Dulce, and I think it was a Halloween picture. She had, like, little angel wings and her face painted. I was just looking at it like, how could this, like, nation as a people see this child as a problem at all, right? As
mhm,
anything other than beautiful. And I think it's in seasons like this when I remember and when my identity as a Christian is, like, hard to handle. I don't love it.
mm,
But in these circumstances, it's like, no, I have citizenship in a kingdom that welcomes this child. I have citizenship and I'm living in that where she is seen as beautiful, where there's a meaningful relationship between us and these people that are rejected in our current kingdom are just not a problem.
mhm,
They're just not a problem. Um, so I had this interesting, I think as a Christian in the world, you're a lot of times you hear what Christians say or you visit Christian communities, or, maybe you're even part of one where you're like, am I really this thing? Because it
mm,
doesn't feel or sound like something I believe in.
mhm,
Um, but I think after the election, I did a lot of processing about like what I think of as my home. And I think that, uh, I think that as a Christian, I have a concept of a kingdom that operates by different rules.
mhm,
And um, so if you've heard me like preach at all in the last few years or speak at churches, um, the only thing I'll talk about is the parables, um,
mhm,
which are these like stories Jesus told of like the kingdom of heaven is like this or this is like this. And it's pointing us to an alternate reality to the one to the systems of power we're experiencing in this world. And so I feel like in the current crisis we're in, there has been like a lot of grief. I've I've shed a lot of tears, I've lost a lot of nights of sleep.
Mm.
I've had to, build boundaries in certain relationships where I feel like those people are trying to harm other people that I care about.
Yeah.
Um, I've had to navigate all that. But the thing I've come to is that uh, I've developed, I think, a clear vision of a hoped for
Mm.
uh, way of being in the world, and a hoped for way to live
Mm.
that is much richer and deeper, and that in some ways just goes directly against this culture of like you should fear these people and contain them. Um, uh, so yes, we have seen, and in Atlanta, the immigration enforcement right now is a weapon for certain political ends that really don't have uh that profound of a connection with reality. So, um, Atlanta, whatever's going on behind closed doors, uh, ICE has not decided to behave the same in Atlanta as they were in Minnesota, for example.
Mhm.
Um, so the reality that most of our community lives with are like people are like, how are they still going about their lives? I'm like, well, the reality that we're living with here is that it's a little more unpredictable, and that the main factor or way that immigration enforcement affects our community currently, um, and this may change. They're trying to build warehouses now and
Mhm.
and that kind of thing. But what's really affecting our community is the fear of what might happen, and then there's these sporadic cases where it does, and so we're seeing a lot of that kind of trauma, of like the stress
Mm.
and weight of the bad things that could happen, and how families teach their kids to keep their heads down. Um,
Mhm.
all that really affects the people we work with, but the the just giant wave we're fearing, it hasn't hit our neighborhood quite yet. Uh,
Yeah.
so we have to live in that reality, but we have to embody, something completely different, and it's kind of a hoped for thing.
Mhm.
uh, the hoped for thing is that we can love each other as neighbors, right? That's the
Mhm.
and in the parables, it's always the kingdom of heaven. It's I think the way I summarize 90% of what's talked about is everybody has enough and
Mm.
no one has too much, right? Those are the two things that matter in the kingdom I want to live in. Um,
Yeah.
so we're working to realize that and keep that vision in front of us. And we do not require any of our staff to share our beliefs, our
Mm.
Christian faith. And many of our community partners and donors don't. And we're happy to do that as long as we're able to work together in a way that says, hey, we really want to create a community where everyone has enough, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I heard you say, currently this is sort of like the tone, which I appreciate because I think that context is super helpful. I wonder if we could go back even a little bit, right? You've been doing this work for 16 years, and I think
Yeah.
one of the things about immigration in particular is maybe people don't even know, like, what is life like for an immigrant family? And yeah, maybe just talk a little bit about some of the things you've seen over 16 years that are like, as a regular person who is not an immigrant or is not around immigrants, I would never think that life could be that way.
Yeah. Well, from a structural standpoint, our immigration laws are like stapled together.
Mm.
They're really old, they're stapled together, and there are all sorts of cracks in the system where either human kindness or malice can like fill that space.
Mhm.
And so in my life in the community, I have been longing for like immigration laws that reflect the reality of our world as it is. And we've had sparks where it seemed seasons where it seemed like that was gonna happen, and then it just never has, and I'd say both parties are responsible in some ways for that, mess, because everybody likes to campaign off of it, so they don't wanna fix it,
Mhm.
and so once you get people into the mix, first of all, the question I ask is, like, what would it take for you to leave your home
Mm.
and the language you know and go on a trip that could kill you to go into a country where you know that there's a lot of people who don't want you there and to fight to scrape out a life there? What would it take?
Mm.
And that's what's bringing people to us. And often we were involved in making the mess they're coming from, collectively.
Mm.
Uh, so they come here, and again, it's not homogenous. There are so many different cultures and attitudes arriving, in our neighborhoods. Um, but I would say that any family I've ever worked with, if there were a legal path to citizenship, which is just like full participation, is how I
Mhm.
define that. If there's a legal path to full participation, they would take it. And many
Mhm.
have pursued it. But the problem with that quest is that, like I said, it's a system with a lot of cracks. So there are a lot of lawyers who are exploiting them, um, employers who are exploiting them. And then there's the political system, where a lot of people get very rich from their labor. And so
Mm.
then that's sort of the situation as a whole. Then you have children who are born into these communities, and they're born into families that are under uh, so many incalculable kinds of stress. And so, for these families to hold together, to provide things that kids need to thrive, like safety, or play, the kind of freedom that a kid needs to play, or provide a kid with the courage to speak up in situations. All those things are just much harder for the families we
Mhm.
work with. Um, and it's really hard to, I think, express what that complex of stresses do to kids um, as they're growing up. But we sometimes see it. I used to call it trauma face when you're like,
Mm.
when you
Mhm.
have a problem pop up, like two kids have a relational issue, or one of them is uh, unwilling to do something that you'd hope they would do, or you're trying to solve a problem with a kid, and uh, then you like I would bring it up, like introduce the conversation, and immediately there's a shield that just drops down over kid's face. And especially with young men, it's very common. You just see
Mm.
trauma face, I call it. It's just a defense against the world because they're used to being judged negatively. They're used to being judged harshly. And often families, to spare their kids the pain of being judged by the world, will sort of pre-cause that damage.
Mm.
um, it's irrational. Like, it's a tough world, so we're going to be tough with you. Psychologically, that doesn't really work, but that's an experience that's really common as well. So the kids I work with are used to dealing with complex stresses, and that does not change when the administration changes. The volume of some of those stresses really does. The volume of some of those stresses, um, kids who were grabbing DACA and trying to make something of their lives here. There's a lot more fear around that now. People who are hoping for citizenship and were on a path to that. I know several who have just backed away because it was too much. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, it's hard to speak fully to the experience, but I would say there are complex pressures acting on people, and those complex pressures break down families. They rob people of hope, and they leave kids with defenses that will hinder them from thriving.
Yeah. No, that's really well said, and I think complexity, uh, is a consequential idea.
Mhm.
It's a curious thought of, like, yeah, how do we deal with complexity in conversation, in solution, in finding hope? Um,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I just keep, like, my mind keeps going back to the simplicity of presence. Like
Yeah.
I just am astounded by that. As long as I've known you and known about your work and been in a relationship with you, like, yeah, I think I'm sitting under the weight of what you're saying and feeling just the light of presence sort of breaking through all of that, which is, I think, miraculous to me. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's like a you cannot love someone abstractly.
mm,
I just don't. I mean, you can feel like, for example, I felt concern for immigrants that put me in their presence,
mm,
but I was unable to love them until I was present with them. Um, and I think that there's a whole, like, we forget, I think abstractions are appealing because we can talk about them quite beautifully.
mhm,
And it feels good to say something definite, and it feels good to hear something definite. And so we've built these whole um, realities that are basically like in our heads. And, but our heads, like, uh, are just one part of a whole body. And so I feel like when people are present with each other, and even my thinking about my work, it changes when I go into work and spend time with the kids, who we
yeah,
work with. And as a discipline, because we've hired staff now, and they're really very capable, much better than we could be at caring for these children. My wife and I both still show up at the program several times a week, and we cook meals and we hand out, cups of water, and we serve the team that is formed to do this work. And for me, that is a practice that's necessary.
mm,
I think typically in career track terms, typically people want to graduate out of field work and get into higher level work. For me, it's like, well, any growth or any kind of executive stuff I do is is just sort of a barn chore.
mhm,
The real stuff, the real joy giving thing is being engaged in real whole person relationships with our neighbors, and I feel like that's irreplaceable. And yeah, like it's like you said, complexity. Like your whole body, you're sensing how people are thinking and feeling.
mhm,
You're watching them grow over time. None of that stuff happens in one crystallized moment from far away. You know.
yeah,
Um, And I talk a lot about the importance of staying tender, towards people. I think that's hard to do. Harder now, and you'll
mhm,
get accused of like, oh, you're thinking, you're just, uh thinking with your feelings or that kind of thing. But I think to be really engaged, we have to be engaged as whole people. We have to feel things.
mhm,
And often we feel things before we can understand them. Um, and that's just part of being a person with other people.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, it just I'm like having an internal dialogue with myself about again, how simple this thought is, and yet how we've gotten so far removed from it. But I mean, all you're saying right now is what God did in Jesus. Like
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
describing the process
right,
of God,
right,
who is love, exemplifying to us that love is not an abstraction, that you put on a body, you put on flesh, you go be with people, you wash their feet, you get betrayed by them, you die at their hands,
yeah,
and then you rise, and rather than, shame them all, you sit down and have another meal with them and explain it to them again.
yeah,
Uh
yeah, that's right.
and so I think it's one of those things where it's like Oh, you just like are describing what it means to be a follower of Jesus or a disciple of Jesus or a person that's becoming more like Jesus. And yet, there's something about it that feels far off from what we're told about or talked to about from kind of the major spaces and places in Christendom in this like day and age we live in. And so it's yeah, it's not lost on me that I'm like, I think we agreed to this idea quite a
Yeah.
while ago.
Yeah, I think we live in a culture that wants to know, like, what are the inputs and outputs, right? Uh, consumerist culture, um, but the effects of presence or the unpredictability of human interaction, I think I would say I would use the word made for. That's what we're made for, you know.
Hmm.
Um, Often too, when I have like feelings like what are we doing here, or feelings of pain or betrayal, or like I'm misunderstanding anyone but I can't get what they're going through, or they're misunderstanding me. Um, all of those kind of pains, it's good to like stop and be like, oh, I'm in the story. That's what's supposed to happen when you're in a story.
Hmm.
Um, it's not a it doesn't skip the pain, but it sees it as part of a bigger whole, which is I'm in the story. And
Mm.
I think often spiritually, we like a lot of our faith culture is built around like getting people out of the story. Like if
Mm.
I'm in pain or if I'm in grief, oh, there's a higher plan. This is just part of it.
Yeah.
Or oh, we're gonna die and go to heaven someday. Um, well, my mission is to be in the story. That's what I'm doing.
Hmm.
And so if I have to feel this pain to be in the story, then that's worth it to me, because
Hmm.
uh, I could never believe an abstraction that removes me from the situation I'm in. Right.
Hmm.
Um, that's just not,
Yeah.
I don't think, what faith or hope is supposed to do for us. Um, it's supposed to give us a basis for being in the story. And that's what Jesus's example is so radical, right? Who says, who would recommend for a king to work with, you know, work with the peasants and
Right.
give their life that way? And it's
Yeah.
radical, it's different. And I'm not always Jesus in this situation either.
Yeah.
I feel
Oh,
like,
that's good.
yeah, I feel like I've been shown at least as much grace and um, enjoyed at least as much Jesus like love
Mm.
um, from my community and from my team. You know, we have a child with autism, and we didn't have any kids for the first like several years of the work, and then when we had kids, it was sort of when the first group of students we had at our work were growing into adulthood and taking leadership roles at Presencia, where we work, when our child's disability really started to overturn our lives and make them very different. And during that season, uh, the team took care of me. You know,
Mm.
they saw that there were days. Wanda, who grew up in our programs and became our program director, now has a kid in the program herself. Um, there were days when I came in and she just could see the look on my face. You know, I had been battling a school all day, or trying to trying to soothe my kid's nerves, and she said, "Hey, Ian, you can go home today. We got it."
Mm.
You know, um,
Hmm.
so I want to be careful to acknowledge that uh, when we experience Christ like that, there's just we can only do it together, and no
Hmm.
one person is Jesus in the story. We all are together.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah. That's another one of those consequential ideas, right?
Yeah.
Do you have? I mean, it feels like all of these things are sort of like a bedrock of a really solid foundation,
Mhm.
that are undergirded by this reality that, presence is what sort of almost draws these mindsets out of you. Like you
Yeah.
sort of like in order to thrive together, we sort of have to form in these ways. And it also speaks
Yeah.
to the beauty of like forming each other and like forming in community and all of those kinds of ideas, which make my mind go a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Um, I would love for you to talk a little bit about something that is, I think, in very real time, which is this film that you've worked on, because I think um, maybe somebody would be listening to a podcast and they're like, I'm not going to go like live in a community among immigrants,
Yeah.
but I like art, or I like this, or I like that, and they can still be sort of helpful in the process. So, anyways, yeah, talk about the film.
So there's two sort of ways of thinking about art, and one of them is that it's packaging on an idea. So you have a clear idea, and then you come up with a nice packaging for it. I think for me, art is an exploration of ideas that can't clearly be uh, looked at any other
Mm,
way. And so the reality I've really wanted to look at for some years, but I've had difficulty figuring out how to talk about it and how to make it understood, is the compound pressures that our kids, our neighbors who are the children of immigrants, grow under. I have a friend who's a very good, like, has a great mind for film, and he's a video producer. His name is Tim Rhodes. And for years we've been talking about it. I think about 8 or 9 years ago, we watched this movie called Where is the Friend's House? It's an Iranian movie, which, by the way, I know this is like a weird time to be saying Iranians have been making movies under censorship and political oppression
mm,
for decades, and that country has a film history that is unparalleled. It's just
hmm,
beautiful. And so um uh, Kiarostami made this film called Where is the Friend's House, about a child who just wants to do a act of kindness, which is get his friend's homework to his friend, but his friend lives in another village.
mm,
And so this kid, the whole movie is on this quest just to do a kindness for his friend, but all the adults are getting in his way the whole time and making it very difficult. And they're sharing their perspectives and wisdom, and they're completely blind and deaf to this child's reality. So Tim and I watched that, and then we shared it with our friend Marco, who grew up in our neighborhood, and he worked with us at Presencia for a while. And Tim was like, "We got to make our Where is the Friend's House."
mm,
And I knew when he said it that that was the way to deal with this story. That was the way to explore the layers of stress that are on the kids we work with, explore ways in which those of us who are well intentioned can often get in their way on their quest to be who they are or to do what they need to do. And so we decided to make the movie like 9 years ago. But then Marco, who was going to help us write it, since he had direct experience of growing up in the neighborhood, he went off to college at Brandeis in Boston. Um, and so we shelved the project. But Marco graduated and got back, and there was the election, which sort of heightened a lot of the stresses and tensions that we were working off. So we went back to it, and we were like, "This is the time." It's the actors and actresses uh, are mostly just people in the Presencia community. So
mm,
students, our staff, their parents, and the star of the film is just one of our young 8-year-old students, and so we sort of follow her on this quest to get a simple permission slip signed so that she can go to the aquarium on a field
mm,
trip with her classmates. So
mm,
the setup is, it's such a simple thing, right? All this kid has to do is like get a permission slip signed and she can go. But because of fear of the police, because of adult misunderstanding, because of paranoia within her own community, um, she ends up having to run away and go search up and down Buford Highway, which is our
Mm.
neighborhood, for her mom. So that gave us a chance to really get inside the experience, of kids in our neighborhood. It gave us an chance to show some beauty. There's some moments like where there's, heartbreaking kindness shown. Um, yeah, so the film was called Con Permiso, which is just basically a very polite, like, "Excuse me."
Mhm.
Um, and we just thought uh, even though it's not a line from the film, we just thought that, like, a child asks in such a small way that we can miss it or dismiss it or trivialize it, but kids need certain things, that they're not getting.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, we tried to put that all into a film. It's about 30 minutes long, and made some choices like the camera basically hovers at the child's eye view. So there's some adults who were great actors and actresses who we filmed who you never see their faces
Mm.
because it's just not in the kids' perspective. And then we tried to honor real experiences. So pretty much everything was an adaptation of something that really happened.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and we showed it. I think I think um, people in the room, you have to kind of surrender to it a little bit because we
Mm.
didn't put any music in it on purpose. Some shots really linger to show an environment and give people time to. And I think people are used to like having the camera rush into something and tell you exactly what to look at, and have music that tells you exactly how you're supposed to feel. Um, and we approached it differently. But yeah, I hope it brings people into relationship, uh, or a little closer into relationship than they were before they saw it. Um,
Mm. Which is where this all began, right?
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
correct. Is there a way for people to see it?
Yeah, so right now it's available. It's an unlisted link. So all we ask is that people communicate with us, like how they plan to watch it. So if someone wants to show it to a church group or a community group or their family. We have one family who asked if they can get the kids over there in their neighborhood to watch it. Um, so they can just email me at ian@presenciaatl.org and I can share the link. We just like to keep track of where it's going and how it's being used. To watch it. But yeah, and then we have anyone who's doing it locally, we have staff who can show up to facilitate the conversation or answer questions or just help people um, see the connections between the artwork and the day-to-day reality that our kids live in.
Mm, yeah, that's so good. Well, we will put that in the show notes as well for people. This conversation has been really stirring in my soul, and I'm just grateful for the ways that you're making whole in the world. And I'm curious if there's other ways that you would invite people who are listening to this to be a part of Presencia and the work that you're doing. How would that invitation sound coming from you?
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to have you, and there's room for all kinds of contributions, right? We need food and snacks to feed our kids. Again, that's directly from that Matthew passage. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. We love having, we only really like to have, uh, if people do volunteer for things where they're in contact with children, um, then we really like that to be a long term thing. So we ask for certain time commitments. But yeah, there's a list of ways that people can get involved on our website, that they can engage. Advocacy in your community is a really good place to start. I think showing the film or doing a food drive or um, we also do pop-up shops. There's just a lot of ways people can gather and kind of get a taste of the community and the people we work with. And then in our programs, we do need people who are willing to establish these like healthy relationships with the kids we work with. We realized that I mean, we've been doing this work for a while, but we realized more recently that the one thing that sort of shows whether or not we're successful in our work is, are these children building a network of relationships that can support them. So, if people want to get involved more directly and care for the kids we work with, we want to make sure that that's a healthy, sustained relationship so that they can benefit from having a real relationship with a real person, and so that the children also gain support they need uh, where they can thrive.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate you having this conversation with me. But also, just again, I appreciate the way that you're making Hole in the World.
Thank you. When you invited me, I thought of all the unfinished conversations we've had during runs, and I just consider this a continuation of a really rich friendship. So, thank you for inviting me to do this. And yeah, we'll probably pick up this conversation next time I see you.
Yes, we'll count on that.
All right.
This conversation nourished some deep places in my soul. I pray it was meaningful for you as well. Until next time, wherever you are, however you can, may God bless you in your making whole.